Hey guys, so I wanted to give some thoughts on the Sabre Pro Wireless. This is right after I've sold the mouse, so I wanted to get my thoughts out before I got rid of it, well, before I sent it off to the new owner and didn't have it on hand anymore. So first things first, I really can't fault this mouse from a performance perspective. Once I put core pads on it, the glide was both reasonably well controlled in terms of the precision of my aim, but also it was slightly above average for my mice in terms of the glide speed that was possible. It was definitely better compromise of glide speed and control for tracking tasks as well as flick shots versus something like putting Tiger Ice on my Vaxi outset. So to some extent, first things first, props on the skate design. It does seem to have worked out well. Second thing second, the sensor performance is excellent, as is the click latency. For anybody who's considering buying this mouse, set it to 1 kilohertz polling or lower if you want. And disable the button response optimization. But as long as you do that, you have an entirely conventional and yet top of the line wireless mouse in terms of its performance. So no complaints there. Thirdly, the shape from a fundamental perspective is pretty well executed. It has a gradual enough curve back here, as well as the sort of length and relatively flat top that you can do everything from gripping it really far back with kind of a knuckle claw all the way to basically putting your whole palm on top of the mouse. And it works quite well for almost anything in between that. Similarly, the width of the back of the mouse is reminiscent of more classic ergo shapes like EC1 or Microsoft Pro IntelliMouse, and yet it has less of a side-to-side tilt. So it's a bit more similar to something like a Logitech G403 in that respect, how it's not as tilted. Generally speaking, this helps keep the right side of your hand a little bit higher, which is typically good if you're somebody who tends to run into issues with not wanting to curl your pinky very aggressively, and or somebody who tends to run into issues with the right side of their hand dragging excessively on a mouse pad. This type of slightly tilted ergonomic mouse is my favorite sort of particular subcategory of mice in terms of tilt. I prefer this design to the more aggressive tilt of an EC or an Outset or an IntelliMouse. So points on that. Other things that were good. Yeah, the back of the mouse is wide enough to fill up the whole width of my palm, give good support the whole way across. It has the does not suffer from the slightly too narrow back that I find occasionally on the G703, G403 shape, where it just feels a little bit too thin for my hands and too pointed in its hump shape. This definitely has the opposite feeling, where it's very wide and very gradual, which is part of why it's so workable to even kind of put my whole hand on top of it. Now, I do have to say, though, that I think they've actually gone slightly too far the other direction in that particular respect. For my grip, when I use something like the Outset or the 703 or most of my other mice, I tend to get major contact in 3 areas: my pinky knuckle, my thumb, and my ring finger. And that provides most of the force that I'm using to lift the mouse, as well as twist, pull, or push it. In the case of the Sabre Pro, the problem that I actually have is the width of the rear right combined with the lack of angle on the hump means that, comparatively speaking, my pinky knuckle can't quite droop and wrap around the side of the mouse that well. You can actually see how much of the mouse is kind of sticking out below it. And even when I try to pick it up to turn it and show it to you, it's trying to slide out that side of my hand. So I can't push against the side of it here very much with my thumb because there's not very much over here that's resisting that motion. It's just my pinky knuckle way up here on the hump. And so as a consequence, when I go to lift the mouse, I don't have this full 3 points of contact, which give me nice solid control over the behavior of the mouse when I lift it. Instead, I'm primarily lifting the mouse using my thumb, ring finger, and pinky fingers, like this, and the back of the mouse is just kind of dangling in the air. This works all right, but combined with the fact that the weight bias is slightly towards the back of this mouse, it does feel a little bit awkward. Now, for the most part, I just got used to, before I put the grip tape on it, kind of lifting just the front of the mouse, which is an entirely valid approach. This is what I used to do with old heavy gaming mice that were also had more weight towards the back. And as long as your liftoff distance isn't obscene, which it definitely isn't on a 3399 based sensor, then there's not really any issues with tracking, with tilt slam, anything like that. So that was an entirely functional approach to it. When I added the grip tape, I was able to maintain enough leverage by pushing down with my ring finger while lifting with my pinky and thumb that I could prevent the back of the mouse from sagging, which was good. That made it a lot more fluid to use in kind of a more normal fashion for me these days. And it also helped reinforce this behavior of keeping my thumb extended and fairly flush to the side of the mouse, as well as my ring and pinky's fingers stacked towards the front. The good kind of upside of doing this is that when I'm not lifting the mouse, I have a lot of leverage and control over the front of the mouse. In addition to the fact that more of the weight is back here, it means the front of the mouse is quite light and easy to point. So actually, when I'm not lifting the mouse, the Corsair Sabre Pro wireless plays to me like a 70-gram mouse rather than the 80-gram mouse that it is. So the rear biased weight distribution actually has benefits when I'm not trying to pick up the mouse. And essentially, this grip tape provides enough of a tool for me to offset the drawbacks that are normally caused by this combination of a slightly awkward hump design and a rear biased weight distribution. Other than that, I've replaced the main clicks with KLGM4s, and combined with the spring tension system in this mouse, they work very well. They're light enough in this application to still be reasonably spammable, and they're not fatiguing to use, nor is there excessive feedback or vibration coming through this shell. So all of that is good, and that you avoid many of the typical downsides of a GM4 in certain mice. And additionally, I've gained a lot of extra crispness and definition to the clicks over the Omron 50 millions found in the wired version of this mouse. So definitely a solid option as an upgrade for this particular mouse to go with the GM4s. The other big thing was that by properly lubricating the scroll wheel assembly, I was able to entirely get rid of the horrendous rattle that plagues the Sabre Pro wireless. So for comparison, here's a stock mouse, and you can, get quite a lot of rattle out of that stock scroll wheel, but by lubricating it, I've entirely gotten rid of all that noise, and the steps feel more clearly defined now too. So, generally speaking, quite a big win. in that arena. One thing I wasn't able to do was find an efficient way of removing the spring tensioning system. So unfortunately, there is still some rattle possible with these main clicks, but unless I'm actively shaking the mouse around, I don't get much rattle from them during normal play. So it's not really been an annoyance for me to have left the spring tensioning system intact in this mouse. Again, the slight reduction in click effort for the KLGM4s was a good thing in this case, as opposed to the Logitech G703, where some of the switches I normally like in that mouse feel far too touchy if the spring tensioning system is left installed. So let's see. Other than the shape, weight distribution, clicks, scroll wheel, what else is there? I don't particularly like the coating used on the top of this mouse. It adds to my aggravation about the lack of basically grip I can get with my pinky knuckle, because this top texture, it is a sort of rougher matte type finish, but it doesn't feel like it has a particular coating on it. It's just basically that somebody went through and roughed up the actual surface of the ABS plastic, and your fingers are able to slide, as is your hand, quite easily, despite feeling some friction as a result of the texture. So it's good in the sense that it allows grip adjustments like this quite efficiently, but it's frustrating in the sense that I'm not really able to lock the mouse into my palm at all. It's always trying to slide out from my grip one way or another. So that, combined with this very strange choice of using a gloss plastic strip in between two matte pieces of plastic along the side here, left me fairly underwhelmed with the choice of finish on this shell. The other big frustration I had with this mouse has nothing to do with its performance or its application as a gaming tool, but more just a kind of disappointment regarding the quality of the end product and the level of achievement versus what could have been. Basically, it's a bit of a letdown. The more I took this mouse apart, the more I found decisions in terms of the structural design of this mouse that created extra pieces of plastic. You could have had one, singular molded piece that were separated out into two components that were then clipped or screwed together, and not even in a particularly sturdy fashion. So there's a lot of kind of movement that was allowed between different components of the shell, and generally speaking, gave the mouse a slightly cheap feeling in terms of its construction, unfortunately. And the other thing that did was add a lot of weight to this mouse that really didn't need to be there. I have no doubt that with a more efficient shell design and packaging of the components in this mouse, this could have been in the low 70 grams, if not a 70-gram mouse. And that to me is probably the biggest frustration, that they could have had a stiffer, sturdier, higher quality feeling mouse that was also multiple grams lighter and simpler to disassemble and work on, yet they just didn't find the correct engineering solutions to make that happen. So yeah, the more I disassembled this mouse, the more I got frustrated working on it, just because of how baffling it was to see how they chose to assemble things and how difficult it was to disassemble in certain ways. This whole top shell, this rear cover in particular, was extremely tricky to get off. And there were a lot of basically plastic clips that relied on heavily being deformed or um, pushed far out of their normal resting position in order to disconnect the two components from each other. And thankfully, all the disassembly that I did on the wired version of this mouse. So I didn't go through and do any injury to these clips by stretching them out of shape and adding more flex to the shell than was already there when I bought it new. But it was frustrating to see how it worked from taking apart this one and to know that this really isn't a shell, unfortunately, that is particularly easy to work with. So the combination of some poor engineering choices and the mouse not really being that friendly to modders has left me with a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. And that, as much as anything else, was the main reason I chose not to hold on to this mouse. I've got enough mice that are good shapes for my hand and reasonable weight and performance. I really don't need to keep something just because I play well with it. And basically, this mouse is an exercise in a good idea done right most of the way, and then just some very baffling decisions in certain areas that frustrate me. But again, like I said, I really, really can't fault it purely as an implement for gaming. Um, my performance with it is sort of beyond reproach, as is the hardware package included. And now that it's got good switches, good clicks, and a scroll wheel that doesn't rattle like a castanet, then it's quite a solid contender. I mean, there's nothing else this size that plays even close to being a 70-gram mouse, unless the Xtrfy M4 wireless with the more aggressive rear shape to it comes close to feeling like this size, which I doubt. Anyhow, hopefully that was helpful to you guys. If I left out anything important about the shape description or whatever, I haven't sold the wired one here yet, so I can answer some more questions, get you some more firsthand sort of input on it, at least for a little while longer, but probably not too much longer, because I've got that mouse priced quite cheap for being a barely used copy with core pads on it. So if you got questions, get them to me quick. I'll do my best to answer them. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Hope this was helpful. See you in the next one.